Well, the season is upon us. The season has arrived. What season is that I speak of? Not the fall, because that hasn't come quite yet. But instead, it is football season. Football season is here. I'm sure several of you, many of you, in fact, probably enjoyed the start of the college football season yesterday. And I'm going to admit something to you. I'm going to do it. I'm going to come clean. I'm going to confess something to you. I don't really know that much about football. Oh, I heard gasps. Okay, sure, I got the basics down. I know the quarterback. I know that you get 6 points for a touchdown and 1 point for the extra point, or 3 points for a field goal and 2 for a safety. So I know some stuff. I know the defense and the offense, at least until they get all mixed up in the middle of the field and you can't tell who's who. But don't ask me the difference between the cornerback and the outside linebacker. I looked those up online. There it is. I admit it. I don't know much. Now, don't get me wrong. I like the game. I'm a Broncos fan because I'm carrying on a tradition from my grandfather. I saw that scrunched up face. It's a tradition. My grandfather, my great-grandfather was from Denver and was a Broncos fan, and so I'm carrying on that tradition. I like to watch when I can on Sundays, but I just don't know that much about it. I don't spend much time learning about it. I guess I just don't have the time, or I've not made the time. You know, there's so much else that's going on in my life on Sundays. It's just really hard to find the time. I know I probably should. I mean, after all, it is important to so many around me, but I just can't bring myself to make the commitment to know that much about football. I wish, I could do that. I'd like, in my better self, to be able to make the commitment to do the things I need. I'm being a little facetious, I hope you see. I'd like to sit down, though, and be able to talk about it, sound knowledgeable about what I know, but I'm so intimidated by those who know so much more about the game. I see so many sitting around and sharing a beer and talking about football, and I'd just like to have a drink and sit down and talk about it too. I could say that I know something about something. Carrie Diedrich wrote an article this week from crosswalk.com. That's a Christian website, which Pastor Mike from Lifehouse Church here in Alton posted, and the article was entitled this: Why More Churches Should Think About Serving Alcohol. Oh, wait a minute. The pastor? A United Methodist pastor? Did he just suggest that we serve alcohol at church? Now, slow down a second. Don't get ahead of yourselves. Don't shut me off and leave the church and then decide that you heard this pastor say, yeah, we're going to start serving booze next Sunday. No, I'm just quoting an article. Stay with me for just a second. In this article, Carrie writes this, saying, there's a photo from my wedding that shows two friends engrossed in a conversation. They appear to be discussing something really serious. And knowing their backgrounds as philosophy and religion majors, I imagine that they were probably studying or conversing about apologetics. If you don't know that term, apologetics is basically some really serious God talk. So these are really serious people about God. And she says that she noticed in the picture that each of them has in their hand a beer, she said. Now, we know the history, she writes, that some of the greatest Christian thinkers discussed religion over ales. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien used to gather in the Rabbit Room, the back room of the Eagle and Child pub, to take some time to talk about theology, right? So many Christians, she says in the article, have accepted the concept of alcohol in moderation. Though some still choose to abstain, Christians who enjoy the occasional beer or glass of wine are not that uncommon in these days. She writes about the article, saying that there's also another guy named Kevin Foley who wrote an article in Christianity Today, which is a periodical Christian magazine. And in this article, he titles it, "The Church That Drinks Together Stays Together." Whoa! Now, step back. It's really getting troublesome here. Is it warm in here, or is it just me? This is what Foley says. He's quoted as saying, drinking is a part of his culture. His culture is Portland, Oregon. Oh, well, that says a lot. Liberal Northwest. Portland is constantly being named and renamed America's #1 beer city, he writes. In Portland, breweries seem to outnumber gas stations. In 2014, Oregon produced 585,000 barrels of beer. Our state leads the U.S. in the percentage of dollars spent on craft beer, he wrote. Allowing alcohol may break down the walls between Christians, he says, and non-believers. In an area that values quality alcohol, drinks can help bring the two groups together, he wrote. Okay, so now that I have sparked your curiosity, I hope, let me ask you a question. What does the Bible say about drinking alcohol? Do you know? As United Methodist people, we have a long and strong tradition against the consumption of alcohol. In fact, you may know that the Christian women's temperance movement, which later became our United Methodist Women, let's hear it for the UMW. Woo! The Christian women's temperance movement, our UMW, were the catalyst behind Prohibition in 1919. In other words, it was our UMW who got alcohol outlawed. Woohoo! Some people are like, should I clap at that? I'm not sure. I'm kind of nervous. Foley, the Portland pastor that I quoted a minute ago, acknowledges that Scripture condemns drunkenness, Ephesians 5:18. Look it up. But he argues that the church would be an appropriate place to practice moderation. But then there are other Christian traditions that have a different view. When I was in seminary as a student, my good friend Todd was also in seminary to be a Lutheran pastor. And I went out to Nebraska, to Lincoln area, and visited with Todd while he was in his student appointment and I in mine. And we hung out on a Thursday night, and he said, well, I've got my church bowling league, so why don't you come with me? Okay, great. So I went to his church bowling league, right? We're sitting in the bowling alley, and I'm putting on those gnarly rented bowling shoes and my bowling ball, and I'm getting ready, and here comes this guy walking with a big tray, and on the tray is a big pitcher of Killian's Red and several glasses. Now, if you know what Killian's is, great. If you don't, it's a brand of beer. And I'm like, man, doesn't this guy know this is a church bowling league? And Todd says, oh, that's the senior pastor. I'm in the wrong denomination. A little moral in the local context. St. Mary's Catholic Church here in Alton has their Oktoberfest coming up. I looked it up on their website, October 9th, 10th, and 11th this year. And on the website, the church website, it promotes the event along with other church events this way, quote, we will kick off Oktoberfest with a keg tapping ceremony at 1 p.m. on Saturday. It is our October tradition that the beer is free until the first keg runs dry, unquote. Man, now don't everybody leave right away. And if you're not here next Sunday, I'm going to come down to St. Mary's and look for you. But what this says is we don't see eye to eye on this whole conversation or topic about alcohol and the consumption of it. Now, that's just one, right? It's just one little example. Consumption or abstention? Which is right? To drink or not to drink? He asked the question. I don't think that's the way it really went, but now, this is not a sermon about alcohol or drinking, so I want to encourage you not to go down that path. what I'm really saying is that there are a lot of things that we don't necessarily, as Christ followers, see eye to eye about. This message is not about alcohol or any other specific subject, but instead it's about this book right here, the book that we call the Bible. Because you see, in this Bible, there are a lot of things that we sit around and we can discuss and we can talk about and we can even disagree about. Just like C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, we can have long, deep conversations about these things. There are a lot of things, like alcohol, as Christ followers, that we see differently. Take, for example, this morning when you came into church, I hope you saw the display that's out here on the grounds. I want to be real honest with you and say that when we first started thinking about this with the flags, and the reason all of these flags are out here, all the branches of the military and the American flags, is we have the special privilege today of dedicating the flagpole that Samuel White has been working on as his Eagle Scout project. Samuel's sitting right down here. Stand up, Samuel, so everybody see. This is Samuel. Yeah. And I'm really excited about dedicating that, and Samuel is dedicating the flagpole to some special people in his life as well as to all of our servicemen and women. And so this is an extension of that honor. But here's the challenge that I faced, that I struggled with. There are many in our church, in our denomination, in Christianity itself, that struggle with this idea of the American flag. And do we have the American flag in the sanctuary or don't we? Do we honor in that patriotic way, patriotism versus imperialism? You know, the scriptures are kind of clear about some things. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God what is God's. Jesus says, be in the world, but not of the world. And one of the dangers, at least that clergy, I think, sometimes struggle with, or all of us as Christ followers struggle with, is we got to be real careful about how much we might wrap Christianity and Jesus in the flag, because we might lose the image of Jesus in the midst of it. But as you know, here at Godfrey First, we're a part of the both and, not the either or. I don't think it has to be one or the other. That we can talk about it honestly and be honest about that idea that, yeah, it is good for us to talk as Americans about manifest destiny. If you don't know that phrase, it's the idea that this nation was established by God and that we're a special people. And I think we are special. But we have to say, comma, and so are all the other children of God. Because, see, sometimes when we talk about our specialness, we might think about that or talk about it at the exclusion of all of those others that are in other nations and other places in the world that are God's children and special to God too. You see how these things can get complicated and we are challenged by them? And I think that that's exactly what it should be. We should struggle with these things that we don't necessarily all see eye to eye on, or we don't believe exactly the same way. I mean, there are a lot of them. The Bible is full of all kinds of things that even itself seem to be contradictory. And so that's why I chose the text that I chose today, and that is Jacob, the story of Jacob wrestling with a man. Now, the scriptures aren't clear about who that man is. Later, it hints that it's God, but it doesn't identify specifically. In fact, all throughout Jewish history, there have been many throughout the centuries that have wrestled with that idea of this text. Who was Jacob wrestling with? Was it God, or was it more metaphorical of God? And we're not going to talk about that so much today, but just to say that, even that we don't see eye to eye. What do you think about the idea that Jacob sent his 2 wives and his 2 maidservants across the river? Whoa, I could have more than one? The Bible says it. Oh man, this is really getting challenging, kind of complicated. So that's why I say this is a sermon about this book, the Bible. Today I'm starting a new series. It's a 6-week series that will carry us through to mid-October. And the sermon title, or the series title, is Wrestling with the Bible. I want to encourage us to wrestle with the Bible. There are a lot of things that we as diverse Christians see and think about differently. I mean, you name it, and it's in there. As I talked about with alcohol and the consumption of alcohol, and there's also those really big ones, right? Like abortion and homosexuality and those kinds of things. How do we approach these? I think sometimes, unfortunately, the approach of the Christian church is that we just sort of quietly step away. Let's just not go there. But we're going to go there for the next few weeks. And we're going to go there, and I'm using a resource. It's a book, and I would encourage you, and in fact, if you want a copy of it, I have copies. It's called Making Sense of the Bible. And it's a book by Pastor Adam Hamilton. He's a United Methodist minister in Leawood, Kansas, Church of the Resurrection, United Methodist Church. And in the book, he talks about some of these things. He wrestles with these things. And here's what I really like. Here's how Adam, a good Methodist, begins his book. He talks about sitting around and having a hard conversation over a drink too, but it's a little bit differently. He says that I have this friend who wrote me, and we wanted to ask me some questions. He says, I'm drawn to God, to the God of Jesus Christ, who loved sinners and tax collectors, who laid down his life for the lost. But I'm disturbed by the picture of God in the Old Testament, because that God seems pretty petty, kind of vindictive. I mean, he commands the Israelites to slaughter entire cities. Abraham and Moses both plead with this God to show mercy to those that he would destroy. The same God says adulterers, Sabbath violators, that means you who don't come to church on Sunday, homosexuals and children who curse their parents should be put to death. I can kill you for not coming to church. Now that's a way to fill the pews. So he says that this friend who was asking some of these questions, they decided to make the commitment to sit down on Adam's back porch over a glass of iced tea and have some long, hard conversations about these subjects. So I want to invite you, sit down and have a drink with me. Let's talk about it over a drink. You choose your poison. We'll have a nice glass of iced tea and talk, a cup of coffee, or something else. Remember, we're Methodists. And we're going to talk about some of these things over the next few weeks. So I hope you'll wrestle. See, the thing I love about this story is Jacob wrestles with God. Now, did any of you ever think, do any of you think that God couldn't beat Jacob? I mean, it's God, right? I mean, it'd be like the Hulk and me. But God allows Jacob, it says, to prevail. I think what that says, at least to me, is that God wanted Jacob to know that it's not about win or lose. It's about him in the wrestling. It's about him continuing, not giving up. It also says in the earlier part of that, after it says he prevailed, it says they wrestled all night long. Can you imagine how tired he must have been wrestling all night with God, if that's who it was? He prevailed, but he went away changed. Two ways. One, he had his hip knocked out of socket, so he limped for the rest of his life. And his name was changed. He's no longer Jacob, he becomes Israel. Israel are the chosen, the people of God. He becomes the representative of us in our relationship with God. So here's what I want to caution you to know, is if you honestly enter into the wrestling, be prepared to come away changed. Let's pray. God, we pause in this moment. The level of anxiety might be up a little bit. When we really get real with you, and rather we allow you to get real with us, we wrestle. The answers aren't easy, God. We can't summarize our relationship with you in a bumper sticker. But instead, we enter into the fray, and we wrestle all night long. So as we prepare to take this journey of wrestling with the Bible, I pray, Lord, that you guide us in that. You fill us with a sense of peace in those moments when we feel overwhelmed, that you give us ears and eyes of humility, that we may humbly hear each other, but most of all, that we'd be humble enough to hear you. We come to this table now, which is that presence in our midst of your humbleness. The scriptures, the Bible teaches us, God, that your son Jesus, he humbled himself to death that we might have life. So we gather around this table, which is the reminder of that sacrifice for us, that we might sacrifice. So as we come to this table, let it change us. Let us go away different than we came. For it's in your precious name we pray.
When we
Amen.
see you, we find strength to face the day. In your presence, all our fears are washed away. Washed away.